So now we're going to start working through the production cost report for the assembly department of Puzzle Me. Now, again, I really hope you've printed out your notes because we've got a very big table that we're going to complete and fill out together as we go through this. And then in the next objective, we're going to do the journal entries. So if you've got your notes there, you'll want to have them kind of maybe spread out on your table because you've got that large chart that takes up the entire page. We're going to be filling that out as we go through, and then your notes have where you'll be filling out your supporting information so you know what goes in that chart. So again, just to refresh our memory, we've got two work in process accounts. We've got the assembly department and the cutting department, and we're adding materials, labor, and overhead to both departments. And then at the end, we're going to have produced this production cost report. Now, in this objective, we're going to be focusing just on the assembly department. So that big chart you have is the production cost report for the assembly department, and we're going to track the costs that go through that department and how they get applied to the products. So this production cost report is going to summarize the physical flow of the units. How many units did we start with? How many units did we start in production? How many units did we transfer to the next department? How many units did we have left on hand? We're going to look at the ending work in process with respect to how many equivalent units of production we have for both materials and conversion cost. We're going to calculate the cost per equivalent units of production, and then we're going to calculate the cost for the goods that were transferred out and the goods that are still in ending work in process. So we'll calculate that ending work in process balance. Now, two terms that I need you to know, and these are really more specific to your textbook, is the cost to account for. So to account for is beginning work in process plus what you start during the period. How many units did we start? Accounted for is ending work in process, so the stuff you still had at the end, plus what you transferred out. And so these two amounts have to equal, okay? We want to make sure that the amount that we begin with plus start in production equals what we transfer out and have still left in ending work in process. We can't be losing any puzzles during the process. These have to equal. They must always be equal. So we know that we're told here that direct materials are added at the beginning of the process. So what that means is we know automatically that ending work in process, okay, ending work in process is 100% complete with respect to direct materials. So when we get to ending work in process and we're calculating the equivalent units of production, we know that it is 100% complete with respect to direct materials. Now we're told that conversion costs are added evenly throughout the process. So that means whatever we're told that they're 25% complete, we'll know that that's for conversion cost because the materials are 100% complete. So here's the beginning data that we're given, okay? And so we're going to talk through this and then I'll show you how to fill it in on your chart. So the first thing that we're given is we're told that beginning work in process for the assembly department was 8,000 units, and then we started 42,000 units into production. So what that means is that the cost to account for is the 8,000 plus the 42, or 50,000. Now notice that they tell us we transferred out 40,000 units, but they don't tell us how many units are in ending work in process. Usually they're going to give you 3 of the 4 numbers that you need and you have to figure out the 4th one. Well, we know that transferred out plus ending work in process is that accounted for. And we know that it has to equal to account for, which is 50,000. So since I transferred 40,000 units out and I got to have 50,000 units total, this means that my ending work in process has to be 10,000 units. Okay, has to be. Now, before I switch off of this slide, there's one other thing that I want to point out. Now, on this table, they tell us that ending work in process is 100% complete with respect to materials and 25% complete with respect to conversion cost. Sometimes they won't do this. Sometimes what they'll do is they'll say, I'm going to make it big here, they'll say ending work in process is, they'll just say 25% complete. And they won't tell you if that's for materials or conversion cost. So that's where you have to read the problem data. So remember we were told all materials are added at the beginning? So that's our clue to know, well, materials are 100% complete. So this 25% must be referring to conversion cost. Okay. But they won't always make that explicit. So in that case, you have to know that. Okay. Now, notice again, they give us this data, and I've given you this in the notes, and we're going to come back and pull these numbers off of it. So you'll want to be able to flip back and look at these as we go through. So the first thing we need to do is summarize the actual physical flow of units. So we know that we had 8,000 units to start with and 40,000 units started into production. So my to account for, we've already said, is 50,000 units. Now that means my accounted for is the transferred out plus the ending balance of work in process, which is, we know transferred out is 40. We know that it has to equal 50, so we had already determined that the ending work in process is 100,000 units, is 10,000 units, pardon me. So on your chart, you'll want to fill out this section right here, your to account for and your accounted for. Now, you may want to pause the video as we're going through these so that you have time to, I'm not going to pause really, I'll keep talking, but you pause the video, fill out what you need to, and then restart the video. So now that you've got this filled out, here's one thing I want to point out. Once we know what our accounted for is, we're never going to use this again. Okay, we're going to be focusing on this data right here. All right, so now we want to express our output in terms of equivalent units. So with respect to materials, we transferred out 40,000 units. Those 40,000 units have to be 100% complete or we would not have transferred them out, right? Plus, we had 10,000 units in ending work in process. We know that with respect to materials, because all materials are added at the beginning, those 10,000 units are 100% complete. So 10,000 units, 100% complete is 10,000. So with respect to materials, we have 50,000 equivalent units of production. Now, as you're writing this in your notes, I want to encourage you to be specific. Don't just write 40,000, 10,000, 50,000, because what happens is later on when you come back, you don't know what that 40,000 means. So be specific. 40,000 EUP, equivalent units of production, for DM, direct materials. Okay, 10,000 EUP DM equals 50,000 EUP DM. So that way you'll know when you go back to find this data later what those numbers meant. Otherwise, what I see happen, and this especially happens when you're doing your homework and you're working problems, you wind up with a page full of random numbers and you don't know what any of them mean. So be specific, write your labels on them. Now, with respect to conversion costs, we also need to calculate our ending work, our equivalent units of production. So we transferred out 40,000 units. Those 40,000 units had to be 100% complete or we would not have transferred them out. So 40,000 units, 100% complete is 40,000. Now the 10,000 units that are in ending work in process, those are only 25% complete, remember? So 10,000 units that are 25% complete is 2,500 units. So even though we have 50,000 puzzles, they are only equivalent to 42,500 puzzles with respect to conversion cost. So now plug this in on your chart. All right, so now we need to start accounting for the cost. So we know that last month we had beginning work in process of 8,000 units. Those 8,000 units had materials and labor and overhead. Then we started 42,000 units into production. Those 42,000 units have materials, they have labor, they have overhead. So if you flip back to your data, what we see is that the 8,000 units of beginning work in process had a total cost of $13,710. What that means is if we were to look at the work in process account for the assembly department, it would have a beginning balance of $13,710. That's $9,800 for materials, $3,910 for conversion cost. Remember, conversion cost is direct labor and overhead. Then we're told that we added to it during the period another $194,290. That's for direct materials, labor, and conversion cost. So in total, the work in process account is $208,000. So we first need to calculate the cost per equivalent unit of production. So we're going to take the total direct materials cost and divide it by the number of units we made with respect to direct materials. So we just looked at the total materials cost on the previous slide, and we know that we made 50,000 units, equivalent units of production with respect to materials. So since our total materials cost was 140, we divide that by 50,000 units for materials, we get materials cost of 280 per equivalent unit of production. Now, my total cost for conversion cost was a different amount, and I confess I don't remember it off the top of my head, but the equivalent units of production was 42,500. So if you could look on your chart that you have there in your notes, we'd see that the total conversion cost was 68,000. Divide that by the 42,500 of equivalent units of production for conversion cost, and we get $1.60 per unit for conversion cost. So here I'm going to plug this data again into my chart. I'm going to throw in the 9,800 and the 3,910 of beginning work in process for materials and conversion. I'm going to plug in the costs that we added during the period. Notice all that data was given to us. We didn't do any of those calculations. And then I just divide by how many units I made to get my cost per equivalent unit. So you probably want to go ahead and pause the video here and fill in your chart, and then we'll finish the rest of it. So now that we know the cost per unit, we need to assign those costs to the 40,000 units that have been transferred out and the 10,000 units that are still in ending work in process. So the equivalent units of production multiplied by the cost per equivalent unit gives us our cost accounted for. So 48,000 equivalent units with respect to materials multiplied by $2.80 per unit for materials gives us materials cost of $112. So that means the 40,000 units that we transferred out have materials cost, this is for materials, of 112,000. So those 10,000 units that were in ending work in process also get $2.80 of materials assigned to them. And so that's the 28,000. Now notice this adds up to our total of 140. We said total materials cost was 140. It has to add up that way. So now we're going to do the same thing with conversion cost. So we transferred out 40,000 units. They get $1.60 of conversion cost. Work in process though was 2,500 units, and it gets $1.60 of materials, conversion costs, pardon me. So that adds up to the 68. Again, notice that the totals work out exactly right. So the big mistake that I see students make here is they forget that for conversion cost, our ending work in process is 2,500 units. It's different, right? Because those are the ones that weren't fully complete. So now we're going to plug this into our chart here. And now we can see for those units, those 40,000 units that we transferred out, the total cost of those units is 176. It's the 112 of materials plus the 64 of conversion. And the ending balance in work in process is 32,000. That's 28 of materials and 4,000 of conversion cost. And we'll see this when we get through the next objective and we finish the work in process account. It's going to have an ending balance of $32,000. Now again, I want to point out that this total, this 140 matches this 140, and this 68 matches this 68. They have to. If you add them up and you get something different, you've made a mistake somewhere. Now, this is the production cost report for the assembly department. Objective 4 covers the production cost report for the cutting department. I'm skipping that for purposes of our lecture today. So you're going to jump straight into objective 5 as your next video to watch. And that's the journal entries for all of those departments, for both departments. Now, if you're just really interested in it, of course, your book covers the production cost report for the cutting department, and you can certainly go through that. I'm just skipping it in terms of time. But the next one, we're going to go through and do all the journal entries, and we'll see how all the numbers match up with our chart perfectly.